For 3 days and 3 nights, the name of the guerrilla warfare riders spread through the land of Rohan. All Uruk-hai that had ran into the riders were wiped. Thousands of Uruk-hai lost their lives on the Rohan land and gave birth to the name Hooves of Ghosts. The riders came and went without traces. They were as mysterious as ghosts. Only 40 riders were left at this point. However, these 40 were the elites among elites. And because God enhanced the natives in this world, these riders possessed battle chi and stronger bodies. 3 days of battle unlocked the first genetic constraint for 7 of them. 10 riders became able to use explosive shots. As the teacher, Han cried unfair to such advancement. Though the riders gained massive combat strength, the group's number continued to drop but their combat strength rose. They had killed over 4,000 Uruk-hai. One rider began cutting the Uruk-hai's ear after each kill. Soon, the rest of the riders followed this practice. Zheng then handed them bags to hang on the horses' sides. Non-stop battles consumed everyone's body to its limit. The psyche scan no longer found any Uruk-hai raiding villages nor scouts. It appeared that the Uruk-hai feared this group of riders because they gathered to form an army of 15,000 and marched toward Helm's Deep. The riders were no longer able to ambush such an army. Furthermore, there was an increased number of Uruk-hai that could use explosive shot in the army. Xian made the prompt decision to retreat the riders to Helm's Deep. The movie characters though weren't too satisfied with retreating. The power of the riders gave them more confidence than ever before. They felt as though they would never lose as long as their horses and bows were still in hands. Aragorn and Legolas were awed by the tactic. Legolas muttered, "We elves have the best archery techniques. Our horse riding isn't at the same level but we can probably suppress Mordor's army behind their walls if we were to use the same tactic." Aragorn nodded in agreement. He exclaimed, "Gondor isn't a nation of riders but we have a large enough population that it won't be difficult to select a few thousand elite riders that can use bows." Zheng responded without paying much attention to them. He was thinking to himself at the moment. These 40 riders were a strong force. They might not be too useful in a war but they could change the tide in team battles. The explosive shots alone could compensate for the lack of magical weapons, close-range combat ability, and sustainability. The first wave of 10 explosive shots would kill off most players. He wouldn't be able to dodge 10 shots without being in destruction. We have to get our hands on these 40 riders. The best case is to obtain their control from Theoden. This influence can be a threat to Team East America and Team Celestial in the upcoming encounters. Or in the least, the riders can reduce their team members in case they are hostile. Zheng thought as he rode on the nightmare. He didn't really participate in the battles during these 3 days because it would consume too much mental stamina to fight without rests. After pondering, he slept on the nightmare. Xian took over his lead rope. It didn't matter to Xian if he got sleep or not anyway. Time gradually passed. The group arrived at Helm's Deep at dawn. Golden sunlight painted their background as they rode into Helm's Deep. This was a fortress built in the depth of a valley. The walls were made of solid rocks. There were no crevices among the rocks. The walls were over 10 meters tall. This was an impenetrable fortress. The riders brought out their spoils. The villagers, soldiers, everyone in the fortress cheered at the sight of countless Uruk-hai ears. There were simply too many ears that these riders didn't get to cut off every Uruk-hai. The ears represented the group's glory. Over 4,000 Uruk-hai killed. 300 warg scouts, 1,000 berserkers, and 3,000 regular Uruk-hai. One of the rider announced their achievement to the villagers. It was a mean to display their glory and to raise the people's spirits. Contrast to the confidence shown on the riders, people in the fortress were filled with gloom and unease. They appeared to fear the incoming army. Since there were only several hundreds of guards in the fortress, all the guards and villagers added up to less than 1,000. Yet, this was what they had to hold against over 10,000 Uruk-hai. The chances of them surviving were slim. Zheng saw Theoden ran down the stairs, followed by Gimli, Eowyn, and 2 members of Team China. Their expressions all showed surprise. Zheng said, "King of Rohan, please allow these warriors to have a meal and a good sleep. The Uruk-hai are still far from us. They will come after night." Theoden said, "Welcome back, brave souls. The scouts have told us your deeds, hooves of ghosts. I am proud of you bringing fear to the Uruk-hai. Rest and prepare yourselves for the battle at night. Let the Uruk-hai know they are running up against a wall. A wall of steel." The riders cheered and headed into the fortress. Aragorn, Legolas, and the players followed. They had stronger bodies but they also needed the rests. It wasn't viable to take on the battle at their current state. A few steps later, Lan frowned. She connected the group with Soul Link. "Zheng. There's someone flying over. He's fast. He will be here in a minute." The scan entered everyone's minds. Team China looked up to see a black dot flying across the sky at incredible speed. In just a minute, the dot grew clearer to the eye. It was a black-haired young man standing on a sword. He wore a casual attire but his image was clearly a cultivator of the Chinese legends. And his rank was high enough to allow him to control flying swords. Cheng Xia whistled and grabbed the person next to him. "Shit. Look. That's a cultivator technique. Someone actually exchanged those overpowered items. Those take tens of thousands of points and even S-rank rewards. These people are crazy. It's scary they can afford those." Xian shook his head. "It doesn't necessarily come from exchanges. There are 3 methods to obtain cultivators' manuals. 1. He possessed them before entering this realm. 2. He learned it from movies such as The Legend of Ziu. Or he is actually a movie character brought into the team by the players. I wonder which type he belongs to. It's pointless discussing. He's still an enemy. Yin Kong gave a cold smile as she unsheathed Excalibur. Zheng and Hung recovered from the surprise. Hung drew his bow to a full moon and placed 2 arrows on it. Zheng got down from the nightmare. It would hinder him from using destruction because he might accidentally destroy it. The young man on the sword was Luo Yinglong from Team Celestial. He had his pride being the second strongest person in the team, especially a team that consisted of 3 Caucasians, 1 black and 2 Chinese. He fought Team Devil twice. During the first encounter, he joined the Zio sect. On the second encounter, he lost to the demon from Team Devil even after becoming a cultivator. And finally, he wasn't able to kill Zhao Ziweikong with the cauldron he just crafted. His pride was on the verge of falling apart. He needed a victory to wipe away the shame. I have to defeat the unawakened demon to display the power of Xiaozhen. We will see if the Saint's method of unlocking the genetic constraint is more powerful or the Xiaozhen methods we Chinese created. The time of promise with Ziweikong hasn't come yet, but we can determine who's stronger. He howled as Helm's Deep became clear in his sight. A light blade slashed downward from the sky. The villagers cried at the sight. The young man standing on his sword floated on the height parallel to the wall. He scanned the people below, then fixed his eyes on Zheng. Zhengjia, do you dare to fight me? Before Zheng spoke, Cheng Xiao murmured. This isn't several hundred years ago. Who still says lines like do you dare to fight? Why don't you say I'm General X, announce yourself. Lan and Hung laughed. Lan said to everyone through Soul Link. Be careful, his mental capacity is high. It's almost at the level of a Psyche Force user. I feel an unknown pressure for simply being in front of him. Zheng responded through Soul Link. But he's bold to come to us by himself. Doesn't he know that each team have their uniqueness? Yet he ran straight to us. Is he bored with life or does he have the power to support him? Xian didn't even pull out his pistols and said with his mouth. Don't worry. There won't be any problems. This is a hothead or perhaps a Chinese nationalistic youth. Anyway, we aren't in any danger. This is going to be just an interlude in the movie. He appeared to know you. So your clone must have defeated him. Zheng, speak something to fool him and have him leave. The veins in Luo Yinglong's forehead surfaced. He yelled. Who are you calling a hothead? Who's the nationalistic youth? F***CK. Speak up if you have something to say instead of murmuring to yourselves. Don't treat me like a hothead. He's really a hothead. The rest of Team China exclaimed. Zheng said. I am the leader of Team China, Zhengjia. Which team are you from? What do you want from me? Luo Yinglong calmed himself. A few seconds later, he said. My name is Luo Yinglong, a member of Team Celestial. I am here to challenge you. He didn't notice the wording he used. Challenge was usually reserved for someone of a lower level challenging a high level or when both sides were equal. His presence currently felt much stronger than Zheng's. Everyone would assume he had the advantage. Yet, he used the word challenge. But Zheng knew Xian guessed it right. This person fought his clone. Don't you feel this is too sudden? Zheng suddenly asked. Luo Yinglong responded, seemingly confused. Sudden? What sudden? Why is it sudden to challenge you? Zheng scratched his head. Challenges are without a question fine if we are in the same team. Since spars would not end up with casualties. However, we are in team battle. Are you afraid that we will kill you as a team by coming alone? Kill me? He laughed out with craze. Kill me? What gave you the courage to say that? How would you kill me? Sci-fi weapons. Bombs. Plasma guns. Laser guns. Or chop me up with a sword. Look over here. I am a cultivator. How can I not have Fabao, magical items, on me? Like the golden silk vest I am wearing underneath. My Shifu, teacher, especially crafted it for me. It will bring up a golden barrier when any offensive abilities come near. The blue jade pendant on my wrist will bring up a barrier on fatal attacks. And he introduced his magical items and weapons one by one. He's indeed a hothead. Zheng quickly stopped him when he got to his underwear. Wait. Back to the point. You said you want to challenge me. My reply is I refuse. This isn't a one-on-one battle. We are going through a movie. I have a battle coming at night. Don't bother me if you don't have anything important. Go back and learn to use all your items. Luo Yinglong shouted with anger. F***CK. You are fooling with me, aren't you? I know all my items. There's no need for you to tell me. Did you say you have someone that can kill me? I will see who can break through my defensive items. Zheng snapped his fingers at Hung. Hung understood his intention and nodded. He placed an arrow on his bow. The bow was drawn to a full moon. An overwhelming presence exploded from him as he aimed the arrow at Luo Yinglong. Luo Yinglong thought nothing of Hung until that arrow was aimed at him. His expression turned serious. He took the jade pendant off his wrist and held it in his hand. Shoot the arrow if you can. I don't know it will injure me, but if I lose any of my items you won't get away with it. If you shoot the arrow, I won't forgive you. Zheng stopped Hung and said to Luo Yinglong with a smile. Didn't you say we don't have anyone that can kill you? Do you really believe you are invincible to show off your strength in front of us? That's too arrogant. Luo Yinglong's face blushed. He yelled back. Enough with the deviation. We will talk after the fight. F***ck, I have to kill you. Just as he was about to attack, a ringtone came from his chest. Pick up the phone. Pick up the phone. I am his woman. His face turned redder. He almost wanted to smash the phone. Everyone else stopped talking and all the eyes were staring at him. He lowered his head and took the phone out. He suppressed voice and shouted. You vile woman. I will teach you when I come back up. Adam. Okay. I understand, but Team China is to wait for me to come back. He then clenched his teeth and roared. Everyone stared at him in confusion. There were several thousand pairs of eyes at this moment. He couldn't even raise his head after losing face. The anger continued to build up within him. Finally, he threw the phone onto the wall. Bang. It blasted a hollow. He turned around and flew away on his sword, leaving only an echo of his final line. Zhenzhou. You won't be always so lucky. We will eventually fight it out. Just you wait F***ck, his voice trailed off. Zhen was baffled and asked the others. What did he come here for? Just to say this? But no one knew. Xian murmured the name Luo Yinglong just mentioned, Adam. On the other hand, the whereabout of Team Celestial's main forces were still unknown. All 5 teams had completely split up in the Lord of the Rings world. But they believed that all the teams would meet at the final battle in Mordor. Hao Tian brought the newbie group to Isengard. What awaited them were countless Uruk-hai. Hao Tian coaxed the newbies into believing that Uruk-hai would find them out for certain if they were to cross the path. And instead, where it was deemed dangerous was the safest place. So they were better off staying here. Hao Tian and the 4 veterans began their daily quest of capturing Uruk-hai. Wang Xia was the most experienced of the group at this task for being a reconnoiter in the special forces. They captured several Uruk-hai each day and injected them with T-virus. Then they inserted a device into the Uruk-hai's heads to hypnotize them as Xian had planned. Never imagined God has this stuff. Only the US has relevant technology in the real world, and the technology weren't mature enough. It's used as a tool to get people to confess and read through their minds. It's also effective at hypnotizing. Xian's notes mention that the minds of newly transformed nemesis are blank. We can alter them at will with this device. Haha. He's simply amazing. Hao Tian laughed. The 4 veterans thought that Hao Tian wasn't too far away from Xian. Ha. Why are you looking at me with such admiration? Relax. I promise these Uruk-hai nemesis will be 10 times stronger than nemesis turned from humans. A nemesis that can use battle chi. Haha. His exaggerated laughter echoed through the woods. Talking about the woods, Mary and the veterans of Team Africa were in the woods. They were standing in front of a group of ants. Nia's plan was to convince the ants into following his orders and participate in the battle at Mordor. However, the task wasn't so easy. Like I said, as long as Mordor exists, they will attempt to burn down the forest. It isn't rational to stay wary every day of your lives. Instead of waiting for the fire to happen before countering, you might as well prevent it. Ally with Rohan, Gondor, the elves, and the wizards to crush Mordor. He spoke loudly to the ants, but he was unsure of the effect of his words. An ant spoke slowly. But this isn't the war of ants. It's a war of men and wizards. Has the wizard not fallen to the control of Sauron? Can you be certain that these woods aren't the next target after the defeat of men? My advice is. This isn't enough. Damn ants, but they are such a strong force. They have powerful bodies and life magic. I have to seize this force in my hands. Neos continued his attempts at obtaining the most important influence in this world. However, Team Northern Iceland right now, a man with long hair stood on top a ground of broken bodies. He played with a ring in hand and laughed. So that's the use of this ring. Interesting, truly interesting. Let's give it to Sauron. I am looking forward to the reaction when they see he revives. Haha. He turned around and walked out the swamps. The sky ahead of him was red. That was where Mordor stood. Zheng slept through the day. Night fell. The sky outside was pitch black. The only lights came from the torches on the fortress walls. Many of the villagers stare at the night sky in this darkness. They knew this would be sleepless night. The movie characters, the writers, and the rest of Team China woke up along with Zheng. Hunger emerged immediately. They thought they could eat a whole cow. Princess was smart to order preparation of food when they just fell asleep. Roasted meat and biscuits were waiting for them on the tables already. Everyone began to fill themselves up. Aragorn asked Eowyn. What time is this? The Uruk-hai arrived yet? Eowyn gave him a bitter smile. They are almost here, only an hour left. There are so many of them, over 15,000. And we have only hundreds here. Oh, yes. 300 elves came before sunset. They said Elrond of Rivendell sent them to honor the alliance that once existed between elves and men. But aside from them, we have no other reinforcements. Have faith in Gandalf. He will be back with reinforcements. He said he will be back with reinforcements when the sun rises. I have faith in him. Aragorn said. The 6 members of Team China weren't in such a good mood. In the movie plot, Gandalf would arrive in the morning with reinforcements. They would then defeat the Uruk-hai in a blitz. However, this wasn't a movie. Anything could happen. The increased number of Uruk-hai was an example. Although the Rohan riders were also stronger than the movies portrayed, 2,000 riders were still at a disadvantage. How many Uruk-hai they could kill in this defense might sway the result of the battle. Zheng paused for a moment. I plan to use the Anubis bracelet. My blood energy has been increasing all this time, so I can summon at least 1,000 Anubis warriors. They are pretty strong in close combat. As long as their head remains, they can continue fighting. Their 3-meter bodies are also bigger than the Uruk-hai. They should win one-on-one. The only thing I am worried about is if the another team attacks us when I am depleted of blood energy, which affects destruction. What do you think? Xian shook his head. The effect from the Anubis bracelet is nearly negligible. You can't control the 1,000 warriors. They will fight on their own once summoned. But we are fighting a defensive war. Archers or soldiers that can follow commands are more useful in this scenario. The Anubis warriors will only disrupt the formation of our army and accelerate the collapse of the fortress. We can't use the Anubis bracelet here. Save it for the battle at Gondar. Zheng sighed. Then what should we do? I can at least fight and assist using the nightmare. The layout of the defensive passageways are nearly perfect. It will be difficult for the Uruk-hai to break through. What about you guys? One mistake in a battle of this scale could lead to death. How about just fly up with the sky stick and attack from up there? Hung is able to do this. How many rune word bullets do you have? My intention isn't to battle the Uruk-hai head on. Xian said. That's the most idiotic tactic. The Anubis bracelet is useless in a defensive battle, but another item has great use. You can also use it easily. The Book of the Dead. The Book of the Dead recorded many offensive magic. Yet, Zheng couldn't read any of the writings in the book. The few of the magic he remembered was taught by Tenyi. Of course, the third unlock stage allowed him to simulate Tenyi to some degree and deduce some spells using his own knowledge. However, the precision was questionable. One of the magic Tenyi translated could alter the terrain. Everyone finished eating. The main movie characters and Team China headed to the fortress walls. An elf was speaking to Theoden. There were also several hundred elven archers here. Legolas cried. The Nighthawks, royal guards of Rivendell. 300 of them. That's half the royal guards. Everyone walked to the elf that was speaking. They exchanged words of gratitude, then quietly waited on the wall. The members of Team China sat quite some distance away from the movie characters. They had conversations of their own that were best kept from the movie characters. Xian said. Judging by the hotheads' words, they will probably enter the team battle when the plot progressed to the battle at Gondar. That isn't far away. There are a few points we must do. First, we will retrieve the force we sent out to obtain influence. Hao Tian is strong in both intelligence and strength. It is also time to harvest the nemesis. The result of the harvest will depend on his ability. Zero and the other 3 members should return to the team. Their strengths are useful in a team battle. And lastly, the influence we obtained, archers that can use explosive shot. Zheng interrupted him. What are you doing? This isn't some amateur novel where you are going to die in the battle by taking an arrow from me. You speak like you are giving your last words. We are comrades. We can't consider death so readily. Xian nodded and pondered for a second. Understood. I have explained what needs to be said. If you don't get anything, then ask Hao Diao. A mortal's wisdom confronting another mortal's wisdom. Isn't it another way to grow stronger? The premonition felt increasingly inauspicious to Zheng. Before he got to speak, a series of heavy footsteps could be heard coming from afar. The footsteps rumbled without order. Torches gradually showed up in the distance. They formed a field on the horizon and slowly moved toward the fortress. Although there were only 15,000 Uruk-hai, they extended throughout the field. The countless torches and rumbling could drive people insane. The Uruk-hai had arrived. The battle at Helm's Deep commenced. Zheng glanced at Xian and said. You always act on pure reason. Why did you suddenly have premonitions? It's such a human trait. Whatever it is, you at least have to try your best to survive. If you think you are going to die, then there is no hope. Anyway, you said you will unlock the 4th stage. Aren't you wishing to obtain feelings and senses? Obtain everything that a person should have? Then give all that you have to survive. He got up and walked over to the nightmare, then mounted on the horse. The Uruk-hai were the strongest species of the orcs. They had a violent temper. They lusted for blood and killing. They wouldn't run upon encountering strong forces, unlike the orcs and half-orcs. In contrast, powerful enemies would excite them. This was a difficult battle. The Uruk-hai would invade the fortress with their overwhelming number. No one knew if the walls could hold them until the morning came. As the torches came closer, so did the footsteps. The people on the wall could see the army with their bare eyes. The Uruk-hai were armed to the teeth, unlike the orcs. Their equipment exceeded even the soldiers of Rohan. Saruman crafted an army of steel. The Uruk-hai had 2-meter-tall bodies, wore dark armors and helms made of steel. Many carried 3-meter-long pikes. Some carried double-bent swords and bows. Aragorn was yelling to the elves in Elvish language. Team China couldn't understand him, but it was not the time for that. They gripped onto their weapons. The Uruk-hai came closer and closer, and finally, they stopped just outside the arrow range. The battle commenced. The Uruk-hai stopped their advancement. An official-looking Uruk-hai stepped onto a boulder. It roared and turned its head. Its voice echoed throughout the battlefield. Then a second Uruk-hai followed. Then a third, forth until the Urukhai's roars reached every part of the battlefield. They thumped the ground with their pikes and weapons in rhythm. It felt as though the ground was trembling. An older archer's hands shook, letting go an arrow that was ready on the bow. It killed a pikeman Urukhai. The battlefield suddenly fell to a silence for a moment, then the Urukhai roared with more insanity than ever. The blood instilled no fear but instead drove them to frenzy. The Urukhai charged at the wall. Ready. Fire. Aragorn, who was standing by the elves, drew his sword. He swung the sword and pointed it at the Urukhai, then shouted. The elves lived up to their name of Nighthawks. Over 50 of them placed multiple arrows on the bow at once. Some elves enchanted their arrows with a green glow. The first wave of arrows fired. The multi-shots all slain multiple Urukhai, clearing an area of Urukhai. However, their armors were not made of paper after all. Many arrows were deflected and these Urukhai continued charging as though nothing hit them. Hung stood next to Zheng. He cried with surprise upon seeing the elven technique. Multi-shot. Amazing. Wish I can see what techniques they have yet to show. If someone can use the 9-arrow shot. Zheng casually replied. You can just wait here if you aren't scared dying. And it will be better if you put your head out from the wall. I saw quite a few Urukhai with bows and crossbows. Hung hushed but his eyes kept glancing back at the elves. Zheng gave a shout and unsheathed Tiger's soul. Hung finally began shooting at the Urukhai beneath the fortress. The Urukhai finally reached the walls. Aragorn yelled. Fire at will. Fire at will. All the elves and elderly standing on the wall began firing at will. The elves and enlisted villagers totaled to 1,000 archers. Arrows poured down like rain. The cries of Urukhai and tingling noises took over the field. Only arrows shot by the elves and elite archers could pierce the armor of the Urukhai. The rest of the archers were too weak. The rain of arrows seemed crowded but merely half of them were effective. As the Urukhai came close, they began to push ladders onto the wall. Some ladders managed to stay in place. At the cries of men and elves, several Urukhai climbed up the wall. Those didn't pull into defense fast enough died to the Urukhai. City attacks are too straightforward at this age. Weapons, tactics, and army composition are all too simple. Accounts of wars from the Song dynasty recorded boiling water, rolling boulders, ballista, catapults. There are none of these here. You charge at me and I defend. Zheng contemplated these questions. The nightmare leaped. The light blade extended to its maximum range and slashed across. All the ladders within 30 meters of him were cut in two. The Urukhai on the ladder fell off the wall in terrible cries. It didn't seem that they could survive the fall. Yet, there were too many Urukhai underneath. Zheng slashed dozens of ladders but replacements came in one after another. A single person's power couldn't turn the tide of a battle. Dong. Zheng's light blade barrier shattered. He quickly controlled the nightmare to jump back down. He was staying on the wall using his barrier to defend against the numerous arrows. Then a few explosive shots shattered the barrier. The shots came from far away, so that was all they accomplished. Though Zheng stayed a little longer, the rest of the arrows would have turned him into a hive. F***ck. That was not over yet. Those shots angered him. He formed a new light blade barrier over his body, then replenished his chi from the mithril ring. The nightmare leaped off the wall. The movie characters shouted with bloodshot eyes. They had formed bonds with Zheng. The members of Team China also shouted. Except for Xian, who pulled out his pistols calmly. Pa! Zheng landed on the ground. The 10-meter fall didn't harm him nor the nightmare because he landed on the Urukhai and crushed them into meat paste. Without even a pause, Tiger's soul slashed across. The Urukhai weren't using their battle chi since Zheng's appearance was unexpected. The 20-meter light blade cut through all the Urukhai in a 20-meter radius. Hundreds or maybe nearly 1,000 of Urukhai died in this attack. Zheng then charged into the army. Blood and flesh flew all over the area as Tiger's soul moved. Gimli yelled. You are the strongest, luckiest, and most foolish warrior. I will kill you for taking so light of your own life, you bastard. Though the movie characters had seen Zheng's strength and were aware of the unique attribute of the nightmare, they knew that once Zheng couldn't hold out anymore, he would climb back up the wall. This was not the time to ponder more deeply. Aragorn yelled. Archers back. Front row fighters ready for close range combat once the Urukhai climbs onto the wall. Zheng's bravery stimulated the soldiers' morale. However, the wall of the fortress was so wide that he had no way of defending every place. Ladders were placed some distance from him, then the endless Urukhai climbed up. They might not have that many archers, but all the Urukhai were powerful fighters. It took 2 men or 1 elf to defend against 1 Urukhai. Their numbers were building up on the wall. The only place devoid of them were at where Zheng was defending. All other places of the wall entered close-range fights. The contrast among their soldiers became apparent. The ones with battle chi took 1 or more the Urukhai without fear. On the other hand, the enlisted villagers were victims of slaughters. They could aid with arrows, but close-range combat forced them back. The fortress was well designed that despite many Urukhai climbed up the walls, the archers on the back could remain shooting arrows. That and the elite fighters in the front finally held the Urukhai from advancing. 4 members of Team China entered the battle and the tides changed. Hung had little impact despite having powerful shots. He was only as useful as an elven archer in this battle. Cheng Xiao's martial art and Yin Kong's assassination were much stronger than the Urukhai with battle chi. They blocked off over a dozen Urukhai at once. However, the one that was most destructive to the Urukhai was Xian. Xian stood in the middle of a pack with his dual pistols. The pistols danced around him. Each of his shots penetrated one or more Uruk-hai and even arrows that were shot at him. The gauze pistols were powerful enough to stop their explosive shots. Xian did not see with his eyes. His gun kata followed the trace of all possible incoming attacks. He shook his hands. 2 magazines dropped to the ground. The magazines were still smoking. 100 Uruk-hai were lying around him. His cool and apathetic expression along with his actions made him seem captivating. Zheng was fighting among the Uruk-hai, but he was paying attention to the wall. He applauded upon seeing the might of gun kata. Just then, he saw an Uruk-hai that was holding a torch charged at the wall where Xian was standing on. Xian was standing on where it would get bombed in the original plot. This was the turning point of the battle. The Uruk-hai couldn't have broken into this fortress otherwise in a single night otherwise. Zheng discussed with Xian beforehand and they came up with a solution. Once the wall was bombed, Zheng would use the Book of the Dead to alter the terrain of the area to block the Uruk-hai from entering the fortress. How could Xian have forgotten about the bomb? Yet, he was still standing at that section of the wall. Right as Zheng turned around, he saw the Uruk-hai with the torch charged towards sewer under the wall. No. Zheng's eyes were bloodshot. There wasn't even the time for him to dismount. He jumped straight off the nightmare's back, then jumped again midair with instant destruction into Jeppo. He was flying to where Xian was. His speed was still too slow. The Uruk-hai was only 4 meters away from the wall. Its body impaled with numerous arrows, but it made the jump into the sewer before the end of his life. Bang! A 7-meter wide section of the wall was blasted. The explosion was so strong that the shockwave blew Zheng back several meters. This wasn't a primitive bomb made from gunpowder as depicted in the movie. The explosion was on par with their high explosive bombs. The instant Zheng landed, he charged toward the exploded area. The Uruk-hai were swarming toward the opening as they roared in frenzy. Then they met the even more frenzied Zheng. His eyes were bloody red and he was growling like a wild beast. The frontmost Uruk-hai that came near him instantly turned into numerous small pieces. No one could see clearly what he did. Zheng was charging right through the Uruk-hai, hoping to reach the opening first. The Uruk-hai of course did not consent. They attacked the tiny human, in their eyes. Zheng's hands moved ever so slightly, but dozens of Uruk-hai near him were torn apart as if they were killed by a beast. Zheng left a trail of torn pieces of bodies as he ran. His hands each grabbed a Uruk-hai's head. When he reached the broken wall, he slammed the heads into the wall. The 2 heads were smashed into tiny pieces. Xian. Are you alright? He yelled with craze as soon as he entered through the broken wall. A trail of broken bodies lay behind him. Not one Uruk-hai was able to delay him for even a second. The Uruk-hai in the distance hesitated as they witnessed his strength. Under the broken wall, Yinkong and Chengxiao were already there. Yinkong carried Xian out right after the explosion. Chengxiao was forcing medicine into Xian's mouth. Yet, his gloomy expression was nothing like his normal cheerful and confident self. The bad feeling deepened inside Zheng. How is him? I am asking you how is him? Zheng shouted before he even came close. Chengxiao shouted back at him. You just stand there and hold off the Uruk-hai? Trust the doctor when you are wounded. I am the doctor here. Now, shut up. He didn't slow down as he talked. He took off Xian's clothes. Zheng saw blood pouring out from Xian's left chest, where the heart was located. It seemed just like... I will make you pay with your lives. The Uruk-hai? Saruman. He shouted, then charged back to the opening. Legolas seemed to be hesitating. He wanted to say something, but no words came to his mind when he saw the whirlwind of flesh and blood within the Uruk-hai army. He frowned and continued shooting. Back in the Elven realm, Xian once looked for him. Yes. I asked Legolas to take me to meet you, Lady of the Wood. Dawn had yet to come. The fellowship was going to leave after the sun rose and Galadriel would give each of them a gift. 2 after midnight, Xian woke Legolas up to bring him to Galadriel. Galadriel said with a sly smile. Oh, emotionless human. What do you wish to see me for? To apologize for the ornament you broke? Xian replied calmly. No, to make a deal with you. Galadriel was surprised and she laughed. Your friends have promised a deal with the elves? Are you looking to circumvent them and make a deal with us by yourself? Not that type of trade. Xian shook his head. I wish to obtain something to you. And in return, I will give you the one ring dispelled of Sauron's soul. Of course, that won't be right now. The next time we come to this world. Galadriel frowned. She stared at Xian with seriousness. Enticing, but don't you think you're talking about the impossible? If Sauron is so easily defeated, the many races of Middle-earth wouldn't have given him the title of Dark Lord. It was a sign of our fear. What do you wish to obtain from me? Xian gazed at Galadriel. I need something that allows a person to revive after death, or to fake a death. It can be an item, or magic. There are dreadful enemies of our team in this world. I am uncertain of our ability to rival them. If we failed, then the one ring and our deal with the elves will fall through. Tell me, do the elves have such item or magic? Legolas felt a sharp pain on his face. An arrow grazed past his cheek and pulled him back from the memory. Xian also talked to him after speaking with Galadriel. He was told not to tell the rest of Team China about the meeting. Legolas agreed and buried the secret in his heart. However, will everything proceed as you expected, Xian? If Zheng forgot about that item, you will lose your life. Legolas stared at Zheng. He wanted to yell but held himself back many times. When Zheng ran back out of the Uruk-hai, Legolas stopped shooting and fixed his eyes at Zheng. Zheng was holding the leaf of Telperion in his hand. His whole body was dripping in blood and so was his hand. He stuck the leaf into Xian's mouth. The leaf turned into a green liquid in an instant then flowed down his throat. Zheng let out a sigh of relief. He gazed at Cheng Xiao. Hurry and look at his injury. Didn't you save Boromir even when he had a hole in his chest? How could you not save your comrade? He was being extremely unreasonable. The injury was the deciding factor on whether the medic was able to save someone. Cheng Xiao ignored him. His needle moved between the skin on Xian's chest. The thread was sewing up the wound. Yin Kong kept a freezing pill in her hand in case Xian entered critical condition. Zheng stared as Cheng Xiao performed the treatment. He also ran out the broken wall again and tore nearly 3,000 Uruk-hai to pieces before returning. The Uruk-hai stopped coming to this area. And so the archers on the wall managed to keep them from advancing. Cheng Xiao's hands moved faster and faster. A bit of redness returned to Xian's face. The blood coming out from his chest was lessening. However, just as Cheng Xiao was going to close up the wound, he cried with tears. F***ck. I am done with this. What do you want me to do? When his heart was crushed. There wasn't even time for me to treat the wound and no time to give him the freezing pill. What do you want me to do? Zheng's expression changed abruptly. He lifted Cheng Xiao and shouted. Didn't you close up the wound? Aren't blood returning to his face? Didn't I feed him the leaf of Telperion? Why didn't you give him the freezing pill? Why? Yin Kong immediately forced the pill into Xian's mouth. However, there was no sign of him being frozen because he could no longer swallow the pill. Yin Kong crushed the pill and tried to mouth feed him but it was no use. She felt his pulse on the neck then stood up. He's dead. Adam. Chu Xian is confirmed dead. Zheng lost his strength. Cheng Xiao fell from his hands. His eyes were completely red and seemed lost. He turned around and walked toward the Uruk-hai army step by step. As he exited through the broken wall, an explosive shot flew right at his face. He lifted his hand and grabbed the arrow. Then he roared as he charged into the Uruk-hai army. Genome. All members of the same species shared over 99.9% of their genome. People who were blood-related had an extremely high similarity in their genome. The similarities among human genomes made up the characteristics of a human such as the body, the mind, intelligence, etc. The minute difference that were less than 0.1% made up the facial features, personalities, blood types, etc. Of course, many of the genes in a human were never activated in a person's life. These genes were remnants of evolution. Evolution of single-celled life, multicellular life, amphibians, and finally man. Many of the genes from the ancient eons were left in our genome. However, what natural selection did not choose to retain weren't necessarily bad genes. Sometimes, the good genes were eliminated first. If a person gained full control of his DNA, these hibernating genes would be awakened along with the strength hidden within, and similarly, the primitive instincts of killing. Zheng couldn't remember the time this sensation started. It felt as though the sensation arose when he was fighting one bloody battle after another in Starship Troopers. He kept entering the unlock mode, he kept simulating other people's thinking process, he kept struggling on the brink of death. During that situation, a faint feeling arose. The real awakening took place in Resident Evil. He was filled with killing intent and anger against the researchers. And then when he fought a large number of evolved lickers, he lost consciousness. By the time his consciousness returned, he saw the majority of the evolved lickers were cut into pieces. While he was unharmed, he realized he made the breakthrough unlocking the fourth stage of the genetic constraint, control of DNA. Based on the experience he obtained from that fight, the fourth stage had 3 phases, early, intermediate, and high. He was in the early phase. In this phase, he could train his body in the most optimized way. He could awaken hibernating genes left from evolution to adjust his body to the most suitable condition. At this stage, his need for the higher-level vampire bloodlines from God weren't as urgent anymore because he could optimize his DNA to bring out his full potential. Zheng was now able to adjust his DNA based on how much energy he had so that his body was more suited for explosion and destruction usage and use them at full potential. No wonder it was said that only the fourth stage allowed one to use exchanged abilities in full. The early phase awakened hibernating genes, optimized the body, and allowed the use of exchanged abilities at full potential. The intermediate phase allowed the evolution and modification of DNA. One could optimize the body to a degree beyond its current best state and allowed the creation of abilities using the information contained inside the genes. The high phase allowed one to control energy within the body at a genetic level. That was only one step away from the fifth stage. Zheng moved his left shoulder slightly and dodged a pike coming from an Uruk-hai. He then tackled the pike with his shoulder, sending it flying. The pike slapped onto over 10 Uruk-hai horizontally. Arms and legs were falling from these Uruk-hai as they came in contact with the pike. Just a tackle from his shoulder was already so powerful. Zheng reached out his arm and grabbed the Uruk-hai that hit him with the pike. He moved his hands over it. The Uruk-hai was torn to pieces. The people on the wall looked in shock with their mouths and eyes wide open. On the battlefield beneath them, a killing machine marched into the Uruk-hai army. He wasn't moving extremely fast but any living being that came into 5 meters of him would get torn to pieces within the next second. Zheng dropped Tiger's soul. He was growling like a wild beast. All his kills were done by tearing with his bare hands. The Uruk-hai were actually pitiful at this point. The villagers standing on the wall vomited at this bloody scene. This was Zheng's reason for hiding the fact he unlocked the fourth stage. He couldn't control this immense power. The fourth stage was totally different from the third. It was only at this stage that he truly touched upon the source of life. The early stage awakened the remnants of the past, but also the frenzy and lust for blood that the simple life forms had when survival was the only thing they wanted. It was a lust without reason. All Zheng wanted right now was to kill everything in sight, the Uruk-hai, the wizard, the humans on the wall, and even the members of Team China. He didn't fear anyone with the strength he possessed. However, the Uruk-hai were nearest to him, so he attacked them first. Multiple Uruk-hai were falling to pieces every second. Head, chest, abdomen, anywhere he attacked was cause of death. Zheng licked the blood that got on the corner of his mouth. He entered almost 20 meters into the Uruk-hai army after coming out of the broken wall. Uruk-hai that were charging without fear began to back. They weren't scared, but they couldn't understand why wouldn't this man fall. It was as though arrows shot at him avoided him. Pikes that seemingly hit him hit somewhere else. And anyone that came near him naturally fell to pieces. This terrifying scene made the Uruk-hai back. Ow! Zheng suddenly howled. He leaped at the backing Uruk-hai army. The leap brought him up 8 meters. He landed on several Uruk-hai and smashed them to a paste. His reaction speed right now surpassed what he used to have during destruction. When his act was registered to the Uruk-hai, he had seized a Uruk-hai and torn it apart. Blood, flesh, and organs splashed over him. Zheng bit a Uruk-hai in front of him on the head. The thought of biting open a head like an apple naturally occurred to him. He woke up from the fourth stage with a shock. The ground filled with broken bodies that couldn't even make out a shape came into his eyes. In front of him were the defeated Uruk-hai army running away. He was over 100 meters away from the fortress without realizing it. Perhaps he was subconsciously moving at the opposite direction from the fortress, since if he stayed there during that state, he might wake up to a ground of broken bodies also. Zheng turned around and quietly ran back to the fortress. Flesh, organs, blood, and dirt were hanging on his hair, face, clothes, and in his mouth. He seemed more terrifying than a monster. Some archers on the wall cried in fear as he approached. Half of them aimed their bow at him. His performance was like how the books depicted Sauron. Invincible. Zheng ignored these archers. He entered the broken wall and saw Yinkong and Cheng Xiao not far away. Xian was in Cheng Xiao's arms. The young man with an average look and glasses was as calm as always. There was no sign of pain on his face. Right. He couldn't feel pain unless he reaches the fourth stage and obtains what a normal person should have. But Zheng walked over to them. He ignored the flesh and blood on him. Is he really dead? Cheng Xiao nodded. Yes. Sense his pulse. His heart shattered. Blood no longer flows. After 2 hours, his brain is also mostly dead. The only thing strange was the leaf of Telperion went down his throat. Did that leaf not account for whether a person was alive or dead? 2 hours? Zheng turned around and looked at the battlefield beyond the broken wall. The broken bodies on the ground amounted to several thousands. It had been 2 hours since he entered the fourth stage. No wonder the Uruk-hai retreated. I can't believe someone like you died like this. I thought you would only die from being erased for scheming God or drag God along with you to hell. You scumbag. How could you die without pain when you haven't gotten your feelings yet? Zheng sat on the ground with his head lowered. He murmured to himself. Something wet slid down his cheeks. Then he fell unconscious. The battle squeezed every last bit of his energy. He managed to walk back because he wanted to see his bro one last time. These were the last words in his heart before he lost consciousness.